illusory movement of objects. It is important to understand the relationship between animal consciousness and the measurement of bodies, point being that an animal sees surfaces only. We can say this with assurance because we ourselves can see only surfaces. Thus, seeing only surfaces, an animal can imagine but two dimensions. The third dimension, being in contradistinction to the other two, can only be thought, that is, this dimension must be a concept, and animals do not possess concepts. The third dimension, like others, appears as a perception, therefore at the moment of its appearance the first two will inevitably merge into one. An animal is capable of perceiving the difference between two dimensions, however the difference between three it cannot perceive. The difference must be known beforehand, and in order to know it, concepts are necessary. Identical perceptions mix into one for an animal, just as we ourselves confuse two simultaneous phenomena proceeding from the same point. For an animal it will be one phenomenon, just as for us all similar, simultaneous phenomena proceeding from a single point will be one phenomenon. An animal can only therefore see the world as a surface, and will measure this surface in two directions only. How is it then possible to explain the fact that an animal, inhabiting a two-dimensional world, or rather perceiving itself in two-dimensional space, is perfectly oriented in our three-dimensional world? How can we explain the fact that a bird flies up and down, sideways and straight ahead, in all three directions? That a horse jumps over ditches and barriers, a dog and cat appear to understand the properties of depth and height simultaneously with those of length and breadth? In order to explain these things it is necessary to return to the fundamental principle of animal psychology, where it has previously been shown that many properties of objects remembered by us as general properties of genus, class and species, are remembered by animals as individual properties of objects. To orientate in this enormous reserve of individual properties preserved in the memory, animals are assisted by the emotional tone which is associated by them with each perception, and with each remembered sensation. For example, an animal knows two roads by two separate phenomena having nothing in common. That is, one road consists of a series of definite perceptions, colored by definite emotional tones. The other phenomenon, the other road, consists of another series of definite perceptions, colored with other tones. One leads to one place and a second to another. For the animal the two roads have nothing in common, however it remembers in their proper sequence all the emotional tones that are linked with the first road and with the second one, remembering both roads with their turns, their ditches and their fences, etc. Observe a horse walking down an unfamiliar route and its reaction to any startling incident such as a wind gust. The recollection therefore of definite properties of observed objects helps an animal to find itself in the world of phenomena. But as a rule, before any new or unexpected phenomena, an animal is more helpless than a human being. Hence the kitten jumping at its own reflection, or a horse leaping aside at the rustling of leaves. Observe the behavior of a cat or dog in a new house or unfamiliar yard. An animal sees two dimensions. The third dimension it senses constantly but does not see. It senses the third dimension as something transient, just as we sense time. The surfaces that an animal observes possess for it many strange properties, the first of which is numerous and varied motions. As previously noted, all those illusory motions that seem to us real, but which we know to be illusory, are entirely real to an animal: the turning about of houses as we ride past them, the growth of a tree out of some corner, the passing of the moon between clouds, and so on. In addition to all of this, many motions must exist for an animal of which we have no inkling. The fact is that innumerable objects, quite immobile for us, correctly speaking all objects, must seem to the animal to be in motion. The third dimension of solids will be manifested in these motions, i.e., the third dimension of a solid will appear to it as movement. Trying now to imagine how the animal perceives the objects of the outer world, suppose that it is confronted by a large disk, and simultaneously with a large sphere of exactly the same diameter. Standing directly opposite them at a certain distance, the animal will see two circles. Beginning to walk around them, however, it will observe that the sphere always remains a circle, while the disk gradually narrows, transforming itself into a narrow strip. On moving further around, the strip begins to expand into a crescent, then gradually back into a circle again. The sphere will not change at all during this circumperambulation. However, as the animal approaches toward it, certain strange phenomena ensue. Let's try to understand how an animal will perceive the surface of the sphere as contrasted with the surface of a disk. One thing is sure, that it will perceive the spherical surface differently from us. We perceive convexity or sphericality as a common property of many surfaces. An animal, on the contrary, because of the properties of its psychic apparatus, will perceive that sphericality as an individual property of a given sphere. How will this sphericality, as an individual property of a given sphere, then appear to it? The sphericality will appear to the animal as movement upon the surface that it sees. During the approach of an animal toward the sphere, something like this must happen. The surface which the animal sees starts to move quickly, its center spreads out, and all of the other points run away from the center with a velocity proportional to their distance from the center, or at the square of their distance from the center. It is in this way that the animal senses a spherical surface, much as we sense sound. At a certain distance from the sphere, the animal perceives it as a plane. Approaching or touching some point on the sphere, however, it sees that all other points have changed with relation to this particular point, that all have altered their position on the plane, have moved to one side as it were. Touching another point, it sees that all the rest have moved in a similar fashion. This property of the sphere will appear as its motion, its vibration, so to speak. The sphere will actually resemble a vibrating, oscillating surface in the same way that each angle of an immobile object will appear to an animal as motion. Imagine dropping a stone through the surface of a still pond and then watching the wave expand out from its center. An animal can see the angle of a three-dimensional object only while moving past it, and during the time that this takes, the object will seem to the animal to have turned, a new side has appeared, and the side first seen has now disappeared, or moved away. The angle will be perceived as rotation, as motion of the object, i.e. as something transient and temporal, or as a change of state in the object. Remembering the angles that it has seen before, seen as the motion of bodies, an animal will then consider that they have ceased, have ended and disappeared, that they are in the past. Of course, the animal cannot reason in this manner, however it acts as though it had thus reasoned. Were an animal able to think about those phenomena which have not as yet entered into its life, i.e. of angled and curved surfaces, then it would undoubtedly imagine them in time only. It could not prefigure for them any real existence at the present moment, when they have not as yet appeared. Were it able to express an opinion on this subject, it would say that angles exist in potentiality, that they will be, but that for the present they do not exist. The angle of a stable or barn past which a horse runs every day is a phenomenon, repeating under certain circumstances, but nevertheless a phenomenon proceeding in time and not a spatial or constant property of the building. For an animal, the angle will be a temporal phenomenon, and not a spatial one as it is for us. Thus we see that an animal will perceive the properties of our third dimension as motions, and will refer these properties to time, i.e. to the past or future, or to the present, the moment of the transition of the future into the past. This circumstance is important, for therein lies the key to our own receptivity of the world, and we shall examine this further. Up to the present we have taken into consideration only higher animals, a dog, cat and horse, so let's now try a lower being such as the worm or snail. We know nothing about its inner life, but undoubtedly its receptivity resembles ours hardly at all. In all probability, the snail possesses some obscure sensation of its environment. It probably senses heat, cold, light, darkness, hunger, and it instinctively, i.e. driven by pleasure-pain guidance, strives to reach the uneaten edge of a leaf upon which it rests, instinctively avoiding the dead leaf. Its movements are guided by pleasure-pain, and it constantly strives towards the one, and away from the other. It always moves upon a single line, from the unpleasant to the pleasant, and in all probability, except for this line, it is oblivious to anything and senses little else. This line is its entire world. All sensations entering from the outside the snail senses upon this line, and these come to it out of time, from potentiality, they become the present. For the snail, our entire universe exists in the future and in the past, i.e. in time. In its space only one line exists, and all the rest is time. It is likely that the snail is not conscious of its movements. Making efforts with its entire body, it moves forward to the fresh edge of a leaf, but it seems as if the leaf were coming toward it, appearing at that moment, coming out of time, just as the morning comes to us. The snail is a one-dimensional being. Higher animals, such as a dog, cat or horse, are two-dimensional beings. To higher animals all space appears as a surface, as a plane, and everything out of this plane lives for it in time. Thus we see that a higher animal, the two-dimensional being, when compared with a one-dimensional being, extracts or captures from time one additional dimension. The world of a snail has one dimension, our second and third dimensions are for it, in time. The world of a dog is two-dimensional and our third dimension is for it, in time. An animal can remember all phenomena that it has observed, i.e. all properties of three-dimensional solids with which it has come into contact, but it cannot know that for it, recurring phenomena are a constant property of a three-dimensional solid, an angle, curvature or convexity. Such is the psychology of the receptivity of the world for a two-dimensional being. For such a being a new sun will rise every day, and yesterday's sun is gone, never to appear again, tomorrow does not as yet exist. Rostand did not understand the psychology of Chantekala. The cockerel could not think that he woke up the sun by his crowing. To him the sun does not go to sleep, it goes into the past and disappears, suffers annihilation and ceases to be. If it comes again tomorrow, then it will be a new sun, just as for us with every new year comes a new spring. In order to be, the sun shall not wake up, but shall arise and be born. The cockerel, if it could think without losing its characteristic psychology, would not believe in the appearance today of the same sun that was there yesterday. This is purely human reasoning. For the animal a new sun rises every morning, just as for us a new morning comes with every day and a new spring with every year. An animal is not in a position to understand that the sun is the same yesterday and today. In exactly the same way that we probably cannot understand that the morning is the same and the spring is the same. The motion of objects that is not illusory, even for us, but a real motion like that of a revolving wheel, a passing carriage and so on, will differ for an animal a great deal from that motion that it sees in all objects that are for us immobile, i.e. from that motion in which the third dimension of solids is, as it were, revealed to it. The first motion described that is real for us will seem to an animal as being arbitrary, and alive. These two kinds of motion will be incommensurable for an animal. An animal will be in a position to measure an angle or a convex surface, though not understanding their true nature, in spite of the fact that it regards them as motion. True motion, i.e., that which is true motion to us, it will never be in a position to measure because for that, it is necessary to possess our concepts of time, and to measure all motions with reference to some singular more constant motion, i.e. to compare all motions with some one. Without concepts the animal is powerless to do this. Therefore the for us real motion of objects will be incommensurable for it, and being incommensurable will also be incommensurable with other motions that are real and measurable for it, but which are illusory for us, motions that in reality represent the third dimension of solids. This last conclusion is inevitable. If an animal apprehends and measures as motion that which is not motion, then clearly it cannot measure by one and the same standard that which is motion and that which is not motion. This does not mean, however, that it cannot know the character of motions going on in the world and cannot conform itself to them. On the contrary, we see that an animal orientates itself perfectly among the motions of objects in our three-dimensional world. Here instinct comes into play and the ability is developed by millennia of selection to act expediently without consciousness of purpose. Furthermore, the animal discerns perfectly all motions going on around it. However, discerning two kinds of phenomenon and two kinds of motion, an animal will explain one of them by means of some incomprehensible inner property of objects, i.e., in all probability it will regard this motion as the result of the animation of objects, and moving objects as animated beings. The kitten plays with a ball of string or with its tail because the ball and the tail are both running away from it. The bear will fight with the limb which threatens to throw him off a tree, because in the swinging bough he senses something alive and hostile. The horse is frightened by the bush because the bush unexpectedly turned and waved a branch. In the last case the bush need not even have moved at all, for the horse was running and it seemed therefore as though the bush moved, consequently that it was animated. In all probability all movement is thus animated for an animal. Why does a dog bark so desperately at the passing car? This is not entirely clear to us, for we do not realize that to the eyes of the dog, a car is turning, twisting and grimacing all over. It is alive in every part, the wheels, the roof, the sides, front and back, all of these are moving and turning. We have established therefore the fact that man possesses sensations, perceptions and concepts. That higher animals possess sensations and perceptions, and that lower animals possess sensations only. The conclusion that animals have no concepts we deduced from the fact that they lack the faculty of speech. Then we established that having no concepts, animals cannot comprehend the third dimension, but see the world as a surface, i.e. they have no means, no instrument to correct their incorrect sensations of the world. Furthermore, we found that seeing the world as a surface, animals see upon this surface many motions which for us are non-existent. Namely, all those properties of solids that we regard as the properties of three-dimensionality, animals represent to themselves as motions. Thus the angle and the spherical surface appear to them as the movements of a plane. After that, we deduced that everything which we regard as constant in the region of the third dimension, animals regard as transient things which happen to objects, temporal phenomenon. Thus in all its relations to the world, an animal is analogous to the imagined and unreal two-dimensional being living upon a plane. Our entire world appears to an animal as the plane through which phenomena are passing, moving upon time, or in time. We may then say that we have established the following, that under certain limitations of psychic apparatus for receiving impressions of the outer world, for the subject possessing this apparatus, the entire aspect of all properties of the world will suffer change. Two subjects, living side by side in the same space, but possessing different psychic apparatus, will inhabit different worlds. The properties of the extension of the world will be different for each of them. We observe the conditions, not invented for the purpose and not concocted in the imagination but really existing in nature, that is the psychic conditions governing the lives of animals, under which the world appears either as a plane or as a straight line. We have established that the three-dimensional extension of the world depends upon the properties of our psychic apparatus. Or we could say that the three-dimensionality of the world is not its property, but a property of our receptivity of the world. In other words, the three-dimensionality of the world is a property of its reflection in our consciousness. If all of this is true, then it is obvious that we have proven the dependence of space upon the space sense. Then if we have proven the existence of a space sense lower in comparison with ours, then by this we have also proven the possibility of a space sense that is higher in comparison with ours. We shall grant that if in us there develops this fourth unit of reasoning, then it will be as different from the concept as the concept is different from perception. So simultaneously will appear for us the surrounding world of four-dimensional characteristics that we may designate geometrically as the fourth direction, or the fourth perpendicular. Because in this characteristic will be included the properties of objects perpendicular to all properties presently known to us, and not parallel to any of them. In other words, we shall see, or at the very least, feel, ourselves in a space not of three, but of four dimensions. In the objects surrounding us and indeed in our own bodies, will appear common properties of the fourth dimension that we did not notice before, or which we regarded as the individual properties of objects, or their motion. Just as an animal regards the extension of objects in the third dimension as their motion. We shall see or at least feel ourselves in the world of four dimensions, and understand that the world of three dimensions does not really exist, it has never existed. That it was the creation of our own fantasy, a phantom host, an optical illusion or delusion, anything one pleases to discern except for reality. All of this is not only hypothesis or supposition, but exact fact, just such a fact as the existence of infinity. For positivism to ensure its existence, it was necessary to annihilate infinity somehow, or at least to call it hypothesis, which may or may not be true. Infinity, however, is not a hypothesis, but a fact, and such a fact too is the multidimensionality of space and all that this implies, namely the unreality of everything three-dimensional.